say all these words, and no doubt about it that Dr. Riten is one of the leading cardiologists and leading person in our, you know, fraternity, and he is very sincere and very gentle, and he takes care of all his patients very well. And Dr. Riten Gupta is going to speak on hypertension. And hypertension is a topic which we come across every day. A lot of patients come to us with hypertension, and it is one aspect Dr. Chappan has written in his note that half of the people are diagnosed, half of the people are not diagnosed. This rule of half is for the hypertension. So he is the one who takes care of all our patients very well, and he is a graduate of Punjab University, postgraduate of Punjab University, and has done a lot of work in cardiology. He was earlier at Fortis, and now he is in Max Super Specialty Hospital, and international cardiologist, and doing all international activities. And I have great regard for him, and all of you know him so well that he requires no further, so I am asking Dr. Riten to please take over and give his lecture on hypertension. We will be listening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the nice introduction. I will thank Dr. Chauhan and Dr. Gupta for presentation. And we are going to now talk on
mute yourself. Everybody, please mute.
We are going to talk on a very basic subject, and I think this is all hugely relevant because let's say if we see 10 patients in the OPD, in a general OPD, maybe 2 or 3 are hypertensive. So it is a very common problem how to diagnose hypertension, how to manage hypertension. I'm going to talk on basics, how to take a good blood pressure with the automatic instrument, how to use them. Are there any special instruments which you can use, automatic instruments for a better BP recording? What is the role of ambulatory blood pressure monitoring in our clinical practice? What is the role of home monitoring in blood pressure monitoring in clinical practice? All these are relevant points which come to us every day. So just are my slides visible to everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So various guidelines which have come in every year. A new guideline is coming in. We have NICE guidelines. We have 2018 European Society of Cardiology guidelines. Then we have a 2017 ACCHA guidelines. We have guidelines coming from Japanese Society of Hypertension. So a clinician gets overwhelmed that which guideline to follow, and surprisingly the definition of hypertension which is there in ACC guideline is different as compared to ESC guidelines. So in 2020 there was a guidelines which were published by International Society of Hypertension. So they try to take all these guidelines into consideration and bring in a collaborative effort and brought in a single guideline which tries to reduce the overlap between the various guidelines. So I'll use that as a basic context in presenting my talk on hypertension. So one thing we should all remember is that 1/4 of the population, world population, is hypertensive. So that is very important. So it is a very, very frequent problem. And how to define hypertension? So I think this definition of hypertension we should all of us should follow is the one which I recommend, that BP more than 140 systolic or more than 90 diastolic is grade 1 hypertension. If it is 140 to 159, it is stage 1 or grade 1 hypertension. If it is 90 to 99 diastolic, it is again grade 1. Beyond that, it is a grade 2 hypertension. High normal is 130 to 139, and 85 to 89 is again high normal, and less than 130 and less than 180, less than 85 is normal blood pressure. We should all follow this guideline rather than using that guideline of 130 to 139 as stage 1 hypertension as proposed by ACCHA. I think we all universally use that 140 by 90 cutoff or that is what we should do. Important thing to remember is that when we use this 140/90 cutoff for office blood pressure monitoring, the same becomes 135/85 for home monitoring. Let's say if a patient comes to you for at a clinic and you order a 140/90 and you tell him at home my BP was 140/80, then it is hopeless because at home the cutoff is different. It's not 140/90. For home the BP cutoff is 135/85. A lot of us now are using ambulatory blood pressure monitoring in our clinical practice. Here the cutoffs are different. The 24-hour average becomes 130/80, more than that. Daytime average is 135/85 and nighttime average is more than 120/70. Besides remembering this figure of 140/90, all of us should now remember the other figures also.
Please mute yourself. There are lots of noises. Lot of noises.
Dr. Dang, Dr. Sudhir Kapoor, please mute.
So I think we should remember that
Now it is better.
we should remember that 135/85 is the cutoff at home. So if the patient is getting a home BP monitoring done, so that cutoff is different from the office reading, and ambulatory is entirely different. So we should follow these different blood pressure cutoffs to remember when we are managing our patients. And how to take up office blood pressure reading? Ideally, they recommend that not a single reading, but should be ideally 2 to 3 office visits in a gap of 1 to 4 weeks before we label a patient as hypertensive, unless the patient has a BP of more than 180/110 on the first visit. Then we know that, okay, this patient is hypertensive. Otherwise, if let's say we see a BP of 150/90 or 160/90, we should always call the patient back after a few days, recheck the blood pressure, and before labeling him as hypertensive. A lot of times what I've seen is that one high reading come in, patient is labeled as hypertensive, started on medication, and after 2 days his BP fell to 110/7. Because actually he was not hypertensive. The first reading was falsely high and he was labeled as hypertensive. So we should be very, very careful before we leave a grade 1 hypertension patient as a hypertensive. We should wait for some time. When we take a BP reading in the office or at home, important thing to remember is that patient should be sitting comfortably in a chair. Ideally, it should be supported with a back. So a lot of time we make the patient sit on a stool. So that is not the ideal posture for taking a blood pressure. The arm should be on a table. It should not hanging in the air. A patient should be totally relaxed. He should be resting for at least 4-5 minutes, and he should not be talking while the BP is being checked. And the cuff of the BP, we know that should be according to the arm circumference. It should not be very, let's say patient arm is very big, then we should use a bigger size cuff rather than using a smaller sized cuff. And secondly, if we are using automatic instrument, then it should be validated electronic machine, not any Omron or any other brand which is there. It has to be validated. So if we want to look for validated instruments, then we have a list on WHO site also. There are other few sites also which list the validated instruments. And in India, there are few companies which are now brought in a validated BP instrument. So that is what we should be using if we are using an electronic instrument for checking the blood pressure. And then the guideline is that if you're using the electronic instrument, check the blood pressure 3 times in a gap of at least 15 seconds to 1 minute between each reading, and discard the first reading and average the last 2 readings. So that is very, very important. This is also reiterated by the European Society of Hypertension that when we are using a automatic instrument, we should take at least 3 readings and discard the first reading and average the last 2 readings, and there should be a gap of at least 15 seconds to 1 minute between the first reading and the second reading. Same gap should between the second and the third reading. Patient should not have taken a coffee or smoked in the last half an hour. His bladder should be empty. He should be relaxed for at least more than 5 minutes. So I think this is very important. So this is what I teach my patients, that if you are taking a BP at home, and number one, you should follow this rule: never take the BP lying down in a bed. Always sit on a dining chair, because most of the homes have a dining table and dining chair. Keep the instrument on the dining table and put the BP cuff in the. It should be tight. It should not be very loose, and it should be above the elbow, not below the elbow. and then check the BP 3 times. Give a gap of 1 minute between each reading, discard the first reading and average the last 2 readings. So that will at least give us some idea about the actual BP the patient is having, and always use a validated instruments. So what you have to remember is that all guidelines mention this word validated. In one study it was seen that around more than 4,000 brands of automatic blood pressure instruments are available in the world, but less than 10% are validated. And luckily there is a list of validated instruments on the website, various websites. We can check and use one of those instruments for our patients. Let's say we see a patient in our OPD and his BP is more than 160/100. What should we do? If ideal recommendation is that we call him after a few days, maybe next day, or give a gap of 1 or 2 days, and recheck the blood pressure before labeling him as a hypertensive. If he's 2 or 3 visits and the readings are always high, then we should label him as a hypertensive and start him on treatment. If the patient's BP is between 130 to 159 or 85 to 99, that means the patient is having a grade 1 hypertension or patient is high normal blood pressure, then most of the times we should call him for repeated oxygen, not keen, and we can do an ambulatory blood pressure monitoring session and then the decision what to do. If the BP is less than 130/85, then we should again after a year or so and get the BP checked up again. So very important thing to remember is that we should not jump and label a patient as hypertensive seeing one odd reading. And I have also burnt my fingers doing this. Patient comes to my OPD, I saw a reading which is very high. I say, oh, you are hypertensive now, let's start your medicine. And next day I get a call, doctor, I'm feeling very lethargic, weak. And when we check the BP is now coming at home instrument by 90/60 or 100/70 systolic. So clearly one reading should not make us jump into starting a treatment. Hypertension continue for life. So if you are going to wait for a few days, I think that is not going to cause much harm.
और यहाँ पे नवनता होता है
Second thing to remember is that when are we scanning?
Dr. Ripin, just 1 minute. Dr. T.K. Chakravarti, please mute.
दवाई ले गए थे हाँ दवाई ले गए कब
Dr. Chakravarti, please mute.
एक हफ्ते हो गए पहले दवाई गए एक हफ्ता हो गया इसी की दवाई हाँ इसी की
Dr. Chakravarti, mute करिए.
दो बोले तो अगर मैं सोच रहा हूँ कोई दूसरी कोई लो अच्छी वाली कोई मतलब इसकी पूजन खत्म करने की कोई कोशिश
इसका मतलब ऑन करके छोड़ दिए, सुन रहे हैं ना, देख रहे हैं, ऑन करके छोड़ दिया है. चलिए स्टार्ट कीजिए. डॉक्टर रिपिन क्या करेंगे? स्टार्ट कीजिए.
So standing blood pressure, when should we check a standing blood pressure? So that is very important. Normally
क्या दवाई दिया पहले
when he is sitting, but when should we check a standing blood
पहले
pressure?
क्या दवाई दिया
So in a treated patient, when there are symptoms of postural hypertension, that is one important thing we should always check. And also, if the patient is elderly, we should always blood pressure on the scanner. Because a lot of these patients have postural hypertension, and if we give the medication on sitting blood pressure, sometimes they can end up with having postural hypertension. Also, diabetics, where there is a more chance of having autonomic dysfunction, we should always check So, as I told you, home monitoring of blood pressure, ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, these are very important tools. They are to be used in conjunction with the blood pressure we are checking at the office. And this is also the website www.stridebp.org, which lists the validated electronic instruments which are available in the world. So we can always check whether the instrument we are using in our clinic or what we are recommending to our patient is validated or not. Because only done with the validated instruments are to be taken into account while using these guidelines. So wild code hypertension and mild hypertension, I think all of us are aware about that. Wild code hypertension is that when the patient comes to the office, the BP reading is high. And but he says that when I check at home, the BP is mostly normal. So we always think that okay, the instrument at home may not be okay. And mild hypertension is that when the patient comes to us, the BP readings are coming fine, but the patient when he is home, the BP readings are high. So again, use of ambulatory blood pressure monitoring is very, very important. Nowadays, I use it as a third empire. When my readings and the home readings are in discordance, I will always refer the patient for a 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. So I think all of us should now start getting this ambulatory blood pressure monitoring into a clinical practice. That is one of the key recommendations which I think we should make. Easy to do. Lot of the labs are now doing the ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, and the readings are very easy. They mention the overall reading, the average daytime reading, average night reading. So we can always see that what are the readings coming in, and accordingly we can guide the patient on the therapy. Now, what are the basic investigations which should be done for a hypertensive patient? One is a good medical history, which we all are very good in taking. Physical examination, Indian doctors are good in that also. Some lab investigations. What are the minimum lab investigations? So I think a KFT, a lipid profile, and a fasting blood sugar is minimum lab investigation which should be done for all our patients when they come diagnosed with hypertension for the first time. A 12-lead ECG is also important because it tells us about any arrhythmia if present, like atrial fibrillation, any evidence of left ventricular hypertrophy, or some ECG changes like Q waves or ST depression. When if that is so, then we can go for more higher investigation like an echocardiography. And if let's say KFT is not good, we can then go for ultrasound KUB. So but basic investigation is a KFT, a lipid profile, fasting blood sugar, and a ECG. So these are the 4 basic investigations which we should be doing in all our hypertensive patients when they are diagnosed for the first time. And we should always assess the cardiovascular risk factors the patient is having, because everything, the treatment of hypertension is also based on concomitant risk factors. So let's say patient is hypertensive, but he is having dyslipidemia also. Then that becomes important, because then he has more chance of having coronary artery disease in the future. In fact, if the patient is hypertensive and has even LDL levels of 130, 135, we should be treating this patient. On the other hand, if a patient is non-hypertensive, normotensive, LDL is 135 or 140, we will just advise lifestyle management and not put him on statins. So assessment of the other cardiovascular risk factors is also very important, because around half the hypertensive patients have additional cardiovascular risk factors, and there could be a diabetes, lipid disorders, metabolic syndrome, which is very common in Indians. So all this should be assessed in our patients. And we should also understand that what are the medicines which can precipitate or lead to hypertension. So this is very important. If we take non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which are very common, these are the common painkillers. So it has been seen that if we take aspirin, so there is no increase in blood pressure with aspirin. So that is very, very important thing to remember. And if we take various agents like celecoxib, which can lead to slight rise in blood pressure, and again most of the NSAIDs can lead to a bit of rise in blood pressure. So this should be remembered, that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, except for aspirin, can lead to increase in blood pressure. Oral contraceptive pills can lead to blood pressure rise, and if we give antidepressants, they can also lead to rise in blood pressure. So that is very important to remember. If we take common paracetamol, the risk is very mild, but it can slightly increase the blood pressure. And other drugs which can lead to problem is steroids, antiretroviral drugs, anti-migraine serotonergic drugs, and if we are giving a recombinant human erythropoietin, so that can also lead to. So we should remember that these things plus alcohol, even ginseng at higher doses, can lead to blood pressure rise. So these lists should be remembered by us. A lot of times patient had a backache and he was given high dose of painkillers, and he is already hypertensive, and suddenly you find that his BP is going up. Or patient is a bronchial asthma patient, he was given high dose of steroids and his BP jumped up. So these things should be remembered by us, that many medicines or substances can lead to rise in blood pressure medicine, and they can lead to variation of blood pressure in the patient. So as I told you, most common things are the painkillers, the OCPs or oral contraceptive pills, some antidepressant medicines, or paracetamol, if used for a prolonged period, can also cause rise in blood pressure. Alcohol can also lead to rise in blood pressure. So this is very important for us to remember that if we take excessive alcohol, so that can also be contributor to high blood pressure. So whenever we start treatment, we always start with a non-pharmacological treatment of blood pressure, and in which we say that lifestyle modification is very important, regular exercise, decrease the salt intake. The salt intake, normally Indian takes around 12 grams salt, and what we require is around 5 to 6 grams. So no salt in your, so that is my advice to the patient, no salt except your dal and sabzi. So any food, anything you eat should not have salt except for your dal and sabzi. So then only you reach the 6 gram limit. And if we follow the DASH diet, which was proven in one of the studies to lower blood pressure, that is very good, which contains a lot of whole grains, fruits, vegetables, polyunsaturated fatty acids, and skimmed milk. So dairy product is skimmed milk, not fat. So they say that if we take the skimmed milk, we take fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and polyunsaturated fats. So this can lead to a decrease in blood pressure equivalent to a single BP tablet. So something like a 10 mm fall in blood pressure can be achieved. In fact, studies have shown that if we reduce sugar in our diet, saturated fats in our diet, that can also lead to fall in blood pressure. Increased intake of vegetables high in nitrates, that is leafy vegetables and beetroot, they can lead to decrease in blood pressure. So this is a new thing to me also. I never thought that leafy vegetables will lead to a decrease in blood pressure, but while I was going through this presentation, so this is an important thing. Beetroot is good. So, and other beneficial foods and nutrients, including those that are high in magnesium, calcium, and potassium. So we know that potassium, but anything which is high in magnesium can also lead to fall in blood pressure. So nuts, seeds, legumes, and tofu. So these food can also contribute in decreasing the blood pressure of the patient. Another thing is, we should all remember is that ENO salt, which a lot of our patients take for acidity, should be totally avoided because that contains sodium and it can lead to rise in blood pressure. Anything which contains baking soda is again to be avoided because that again contains sodium and can lead to rise in blood pressure. So we have to teach our patients that they should follow this healthy lifestyle along with moderation in alcohol consumption. If they are overweight, they should reduce weight, because if they lose 10 kg weight, that can also lead to 5 to 10 millimeter decrease in blood pressure, systolic blood pressure. And moderate consumption of healthy drinks is good. Coffee, green and black tea, and juice, and coke. So moderation can help, but smoking is very important. Exercise, rule 4 is there. At least 40 minutes walk 4 days a week is good enough to reduce stress, and we have yoga which we can use in our country. So that is a very important tool we have which can help in controlling blood pressure, and reduce exposure to air pollution. So now that is again a very important contributor. Air pollution is now contributing to increase heart disease as well as hypertension. And we all know that when the weather changes in winters, the BP medicine requirement increases. So we should be very careful in winters. We should titrate our patients not summers. So a lot of my patients will have to increase the dose of their BP in the winter season. So that should be my tolerance. Now, when we come to the drug treatment of hypertension, which is very important thing, what we should remember is that all the guidelines have made it very easy. All recommend that we should start with a combination, unless like give a smaller dose of 2 medicines rather than giving a higher dose of a single medicine. So that is one principle. Every guideline is now in agreement. Secondly, for single dose, like giving a single medicine, not a combination, but a single medicine is only meant for elderly, frail patients. Secondly, if the patient's blood pressure is between 140 to 150 systolic and 90 to 95 diastolic, in that subgroup of patients, we should think of starting with a single medicine. Otherwise, we should always give a combination. And the most preferred combination is a combination of a ACE-ARB plus a calcium channel blocker. So, which translates into a telmisartan plus an amlodipine combination in our clinical practice. So, that is a combination we should be starting in most of our patients. You see, when we talk of all the guidelines, these are the guidelines that they have initially, at least for 4 to 8 weeks, they have tried lifestyle management, and then if the BP has not come down, then they have started these medications. In India, what we do is that we don't wait for a 4 to 8 week of titration. We straightway start the patient on medications. And sometimes our patients land up with low BP. So my suggestion to you is that if you are patient enough and we have given a 3 to 4 weeks trial of lifestyle modification and the BP has not come down, if you then start with this combination, then it is going to be okay. Otherwise, if your patient BP is slightly on the lower side, that is less than 160/100, then probably the single medicine only, because we tend to start medicine very early and we start medicine and lifestyle modification side by side. So what happens is that in the next 6 to 8 weeks, the lifestyle modification will also lead to some reduction in blood pressure. And if you start 2 medicines, then sometimes the BP can become very low. So in India, because we are treating the patient differently, we can start with the single medicine also, but that is a clinical judgment you have to use. But all guidelines are in agreement that we should give a smaller dose of a combination, which is amlodipine plus calcium channel blockers. Though European Society of Cardiology and ACC guidelines say that we can start with the ACE or ARB plus calcium channel blocker also, or we can start with the ACE-ARB plus a diuretic combination also as a first line drug. Second line is that we should increase the dose of that combination. That if we're giving a smaller dose, we can go to full dose of that combination. And the next step is to add a third agent. So let's say we're giving a ACE plus diuretic, we should add a calcium channel blocker. If we're giving a ACE plus calcium channel blocker, we should add a diuretic to that patient. All the guidelines now prefer a single pill combination, long-acting molecules in a single pill, so that the number of pill burden is less and compliance is more. If after giving all these 3 agents, the blood pressure is still not controlled, then we can add a spironolactone dose is 12.5 to 50, but we have to look carefully for the potassium of the patient, because if the potassium is high, then we should not be giving this agent. Another important tip to remember is that never believe the potassium coming from these collection centers. So nowadays what has happened is that most of the potassium reports which are coming in are from the Lal lab and all those tests, where the patient's sample is taken and then taken to a core lab, and it takes at least 5-6 hours for the sample to get processed. And in that meanwhile, a lot of potassium from the cells leaches out into the serum and leads to a false potassium, high potassium. So always, if you have a patient on a, let's say, a ACE-ARB or a patient on a spironolactone and his potassium is high, then get it rechecked from a local lab where the testing is done in-house before you stop the spironolactone or ACE or ARB in this patient. Also, what we should remember is that beta blockers can be given at any stage if the patient has comorbid conditions, like heart failure patient with a hypertension, patient is having angina, patient is post-MI, patient is having atrial fibrillation, young males with a lot of tachycardia. So, or female, if she is planning a pregnancy, because in pregnancy beta blockers are considered safe. So then beta blockers have a role. But otherwise, in these guidelines, beta blockers do not come up to stage 4. And beyond that, we can also use alpha blockers. We can use central acting agents. So these are agents as a reserve drug once the BP is not controlled, using these 4 drugs in our armamentarium. So I think this slide should be understood by all of us that giving a ACE inhibitor or a angiotensin receptor blocker plus a calcium channel blocker is a standard therapy. We can substitute with a calcium channel blocker with a diuretic if we want to, and if the BP is not controlled, we should add the third agent. If you have not given a diuretic, we can add a diuretic. If we have not given a calcium channel blocker, we can add a calcium channel blocker. And 4th stage is spironolactone if potassium is okay. So what we should aim for is a once a daily regimen which provides a 24-hour blood pressure control. So multiple pills, multiple timings, they are not recommended. Important thing to remember is that if you are giving a BP medication, always it should be taken with a gap of half an hour plus minus. Means, let's say you say that you take a pill at 9 a.m. in the morning. The next day patient can take the pill at 8:30 or up to 9:30, not before or after. Otherwise, it will not be good for the patient. So that again should be remembered by all of us. And what are the BP targets? Let's say we are treating a patient. So what is our aim? So if the BP is more than 140/90, that is one what when we should start a treatment. If the patient's after lifestyle management whatever efforts he is made, still the BP is not coming okay, then the threshold is that BP more than 140/90 is the threshold for starting the treatment. And what are the targets of treatment? What we want to achieve? If the age is less than 65 years of age, then we want the BP to become less than 130/80. If age is more than 65 years of, then we want the BP to be less than 140/90. So very important to remember is that start treatment if BP is more than 140/90 in spite of lifestyle management, and goal is to bring it to less than 130/80 if the age is less than 65 years of age, and if patient is elderly, then even up to 140/90 BP is acceptable. And this I already told you that start with a low dose of AR plus calcium blocker, go to full dose of ARP and calcium blocker, then add a diuretic and add a spironolactone in a stepwise manner. Use single pill combination and use thiazide like diuretics preferentially. So that means we should be using indapamide or chlorthalidone in our patients rather than using hydrochlorothiazide. So we should be using that in most of our patients. Now coming to few circumstances like resistant hypertension. So resistant hypertension is that if the BP remains more than 140/90 when the patient is on at least 3 antihypertensives including a diuretic. So that is called as resistant hypertension. But we should exclude pseudo-resistant hypertension, which is a white coat effect that patient comes to the OPD, BP is high. But so we should always get an ambulatory blood pressure monitoring done in these patients before we go on increasing the dose of medicine to ascertain whether that actually the patient is having a resistant hypertension or not. Secondly, we should always check whether he is taking proper medications or not. Sometimes you can ask him to bring the pills he is taking. Maybe what you have written, what he is taking is different. Also, we should check that whether the medicines are actually same what we have written. Sometimes what happens is that we have written one medicine and chemist has given a different medicine. And is the patient taking some other substance which can lead to, like he's on some steroids or he's on some painkillers which can lead to this problem. So this should be assessed in these patients. And we should, let's say the patient is on a diuretic, we can, like he's on a chlorthalidone 25, we should always try to increase the dose of that diuretic. So we can, number one is titrate the diuretic. Another step we can do is to add a low dose of spironolactone to this patient if the potassium is more than less than 4.5 and EGFR is more than 45. So spironolactone can be added. If that doesn't work, we can always use alpha blockers. We can use eplerenone instead of spironolactone. We can use clonidine and beta blockers. So these all can be used in these patients if the BP is still not controlled. And if still not controlled with all these agents, then of course he will require some more extensive investigation in a tertiary care center. Now, what is secondary hypertension? Secondary hypertension is then when we have a definite cause for hypertension. So when should we screen for a secondary hypertension? So let's say a patient comes to us. Should we consider secondary hypertension in all, or there are few patients where we should be considering? So number one is early onset hypertension. When a young boy of 15, 16 years of age and he has become hypertensive, he is not obese, there is no reason for him to be having this high BP, then we should always look for secondary hypertension. If the patient has resistant hypertension, not getting controlled on even 3 drugs, including a diuretic, then we should assess for secondary hypertension. Sudden BP control deterioration, that patient BP was very good, without any reason the BP has gone haywire. So we should also look for secondary hypertension. And in some hypertensive urgencies and emergencies also, we should rule out a secondary hypertension. So For secondary hypertension, we should not be doing that battery of tests in each and every patient. So that should be meant only for specific subgroup of patient, and we should exclude a pseudo-resistant hypertension or drug-induced hypertension in these patients. And basic screening in these patients will be same tests which were written previously, plus urine analysis. Plus, we should be doing some more investigation like looking for a pheochromocytoma and renal artery stenosis. All those investigations should be done in these patients. Now, another topic is hypertension in pregnancy. How to manage this? Because a lot of patients who come to your clinic may tell us that they must be hypertensive, and now they tell that they are now becoming pregnant. So that is an important thing. So when we talk of pregnancy, there are three types of hypertension. One is the pre-existing hypertension. The patient is already hypertensive and she has now become pregnant. One is gestational hypertension, when the patient was normotensive before pregnancy and now during pregnancy her BP has gone up. And the extension of gestational hypertension is the preeclampsia, eclampsia, and HELLP syndrome. These are part of gestational hypertension. So how to manage these? So hypertension affects around 5 to 10% of the pregnancies worldwide, and it can lead to a lot of complications like placental abruption, stroke, vascular disease, fetal complications. So BP measurement is same as we use every same method we have done. And investigations, in addition, we should be checking for a liver enzyme, uric acid, and urine analysis should be part. Proteinuria is a very important component which should be checked during if the BP becomes high during pregnancy. And if the patient is at a high risk of preeclampsia, then aspirin and oral calcium are to be recommended. And the treatment, this is a very important slide, we all should remember that when should we initiate treatment? If the BP is more than 150 by 95, then we should start treatment. And gestational hypertension will be if more than 140 by 90. So clearly, if the BP in a pregnant lady is more than 140 by 90, I think we should immediately consider starting the treatment. And the drug of choice is methyl-dopa. Beta blockers is labetalol, and we can use the amlodipine, which is a dihydropyridine calcium channel blocker also for these patients. So these three group of medicines are to be recommended in subgroup of patients for blood pressure control. So this is going to more extensive management, I think, which we don't usually see in our clinical practice. This will be managed in hospitals only. So this is a brief chart of the same thing I told you, that how to manage the blood pressure. We have already discussed everything in this. Now, what are the difference of the International Society of Hypertension guidelines versus the European Society of Hypertension? One is that mostly the International Society guidelines and European Society guidelines are same for diagnosis, same for cardiovascular risk assessment, treatment, drug treatment, BP threshold is also similar. So there is not much of a difference there. And the only thing is that they recommend when they come to treatment part, they recommend either a ACE-ARB plus calcium channel blocker or ACE plus diuretic. While International Society of Hypertension guidelines, they recommend that we should be using ACE ARB plus calcium channel blocker CCB as a first line drug. And I also feel that this is what we usually do in our clinical practice. Diuretics, sometimes we don't use as a first line drug in most of our patients. The treatment targets again are less than 140 by 90, but and ideal is around 130 by 80 only. So clearly, most of the time we want to achieve a BP of something like 130 by 80 and less than 140 by 90. So I think there is not much of a difference between the European Society and International Society of Hypertension guidelines. But if we take ACC/HA guidelines, so then there is a difference, because the blood pressure definition is a difference, because so let's come to some of the changes which are there. So in American Heart Association guidelines, Stage 1 hypertension is 130 to 139 and 80 to 89 diastolic. So there is a difference in definition. So, but I clearly feel that in Indian setup, that is not of much importance because mostly all of us are using 140/90 as a cutoff for our treatment. So what is the basic summary which I want to say? One is that wider use of out-of-office BP measurements with the ambulatory blood pressure monitoring is one which we will be recommending most of our patients. Home monitoring recommended, but with a validated instrument. And in India, only I know of only one validated instrument, but you may be aware of more. So I usually recommend that patient they should go for a validated blood pressure instrument at their home if they want a proper blood pressure measurement. That's conservative treatment of hypertension, especially in elderly and very old people. So I want to make clear that as the age increases, we should loosen our targets for BP control, but we should not be very relaxed. So even in a very elderly patient, we still want the BP to be less than 90 of the two values. And in elderly, we know that it is not the systolic is important. Our target for systolic blood pressure is not elderly patients. Important and preferred use of a two drug combination, which is very important. Single pill combination, very important to remember, and use of a ACRB plus CCB combination, or we can use a thiazide-like diuretic in our patient as a core treatment strategy. So with this I end my talk. I think because this is a common topic, we'll have a lot of questions.
Thank you. Sir, thank you, Dr. Viknesh. It was a very nice talk. And I have some small questions.
Yes, sir.
You see, we get every day patients who was having a hypertensive, history, but all of a sudden his blood pressure is recorded to be very high. Say in the tune of about 220/120 or say 110. Such patients come to us in emergency. And what treatment we should advise to these patients?
So I think it's a very relevant question. That patient is already a hypertensive and maybe he was not regular in the medicines or he has not taken the BP properly in between and he just continues to take the tablets and now he comes to you with a very high BP. What to do? So number one we should remember is that putting a nifedipine tablet under the tongue is not recommended. So that is our reflex action, and I remember while I was doing my MD medicine, I used to keep those tablets in my pocket. So I'll puncture the tablet, put it under the tongue, BP will come down in few hours time. So that is totally now contraindicated because it has been shown in various studies that nifedipine short acting given under the tongue can precipitate coronary events. So that is to be totally avoided. What we should do is always recheck the BP, make the patient lie down, make the patient relax, recheck the BP after 1 hour or half an hour and see is it actually high or not. If it is high, then giving a diuretic to that patient will bring the BP down further. So I think if you have a facility of giving an injection at your clinic, then giving a diuretic is good enough. That will usually bring the BP down because diuretic acts fast. Giving a tablet of a calcineurin blocker will work, but then it takes few hours and sometimes the patient may be in a lot of stress, so that will not work. If even after giving one of the tablets, let's say you've given an amlodipine tablet and BP is not come down, BP is waiting in your clinic for 1 hour, BP is still 200, then I think it is prudent to refer the patient to a nearby hospital emergency for a longer follow-up, because in a clinic keeping the patient for more than few hours is not feasible because you don't have that much space in our clinics.
Thank you. Sir, another thing about the ambulatory blood pressure measurement. We have been listening to this ambulatory, but ambulatory also involves a lot of, difficulties. One has to put that stop for 24 hours and then one has to come to the conclusion whether the person is having hypertension significant or not. So, you see, this process is being advocated these days. What is your opinion about? You have already told that it is good, but how far it is good is still, if we take reading 3-4 times a day, and depends on that, how do you see that?
There are 2-3 things I want to discuss. Number one is that ambulatory blood pressure monitoring is very useful. So there is, and I'll give you an example in NICE guidelines which are coming from UK. If you are a stage 1 hypertension, without doing an ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, the NHS will not prescribe medicine. Let's say you are a doctor there in UK and your patient comes to you with stage 1 hypertension and you want to prescribe, let's say, amlodipine to that patient through NHS. You cannot do till you enter the ambulatory blood pressure readings on the table. Reason is that what they found in UK was that around 20 to 25% of the patients who were hypertensive were actually not hypertensive. They were prescribed medicines because of 2-3 office readings, and then it was found that they were actually normotensive. So in UK what has happened is that treatment cost is borne by the government and the investigation costs are also borne by the government. So they found out that if you do an ambulatory blood pressure monitoring in these patients and avoid 20% of the patients who actually don't require medicine, and we give them medicine. So clearly that these are very practical guidelines. So I find that ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, if you do in selected subgroup of patients where you want to have some specific idea, I think then there is no problem. 95% of my patients accept ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. They don't have any complaints about putting that BP cuff and all. 5% will say, "Bhai, haath mera wo ढीला पड़ गया." So those few patients will always be there, but 95% are very happy with that ambulatory, and they accept the reports also. Once I show them on ambulatory that your BP is fairly well controlled, so then they will read that report, and I think they are more happy with that also. So I think clearly it has a utility. We should be using more of ambulatory in our clinical practice, and there is no bias on this because ambulatory is not driven by some company. It is a therapy which is there. It is a diagnostic tool which we have. It is not. There is no company which is driving the more use of ambulatory. But evidence is very clear that we should be using more ambulatory in our practice.
Dr. Chauhan, can I ask one question? We have to leave.
Yeah, go ahead, Ashok.
Dr. Gupta, most of the time I know this group is having elite members of physician forum. I'm very much impressed about that. But most of the time, BP checking in private hospital, particularly even if it is a max or Fortis or a fairly common hospital, the BP is mostly checked by attendants, nursing attendant or a male attendant. And
Yes.
they don't know what is the norms of checking the BP. Sometimes I have seen him in the Max hospital also. I went with my wife and the BP was checked by nursing attendant by sitting in the chair itself. No harm thing at all. So how to do anything because that person comes to our clinic like, Dr. Chauhan and any other clinic, the BP is totally different. So can't we do anything as a, association or something like that so that you know what I mean to say.
Sir, that's why I mentioned a slide. I showed a slide where there was a correct posture of taking the blood pressure. It should be checked. So, and that is the reason that I think we should rely more on home BP monitoring which the patient brings in. So nowadays what happens is that I will not be guided by my single one office BP reading which is taken in a crowded space where patient may not be rested for 5 minutes. So I usually recommend my patients I teach them how to take a proper home monitoring with 3 readings, gap of 1 minute between each reading, average the last 2. And when they come to my office and they bring that 20-30 readings which they have taken in the last 1.5 months, so they show me those readings. I believe those readings more than what I get in my clinic. So I totally agree with you that we don't have an optimal condition of checking BP in the hospitals or in crowded clinics. So I think we should rely more on home monitoring, and that is what even the guidelines are recommending nowadays, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir, the house is open. If anybody, Dr. Chauhan, Dr. Tulsi or Dr. Kalra.
Dr. Gupta?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Chauhan. Please.
Dr. Gupta and Dr. P.K. Bangla?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Achha.
Yeah, doctor.
Hello, Dr. Hussain. Regarding this chlorthalidone, can you give it on alternate days?
Sir, though the half-life is long, but I think recommendation ideally we should be giving them once a day. We can give a smaller dose, sir. it comes from 6.25, so we can give it 6.25 once a day, sir.
The patients on, elderly patients on these diuretics, what is the risk of hyponatremia and hypokalemia?
Sir, you are absolutely right, sir. That is why, as I told you, I use diuretics not as my first line drug in India, because we are a tropical country. Hyponatremia and hypokalemia, especially in elderly, is very common. So I am very, very careful and scared of giving a diuretic so that it shouldn't lead to that much of If you are an elderly, your worry is totally you are right in your worrying, because we should be then taking the sodium potassium more frequently.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Dr. Gupta, can I ask one question, sir?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Malini, sir. So one small home blood monitoring if you're doing, is this domestic or home blood monitoring with the electronic equipment? You said validated blood pressure equipment. What are those and how to get them?
Sir, there is a one validated instrument that is developed by Eris Life Sciences in India. So they have launched a brand known as Circa, CIRCA. So the Circa is available on Amazon.com, 1mg.com and all, and it is a validated blood pressure instrument. So that can be used in our to advise our patients. Slightly more expensive than our usual Omron instrument, but it is a validated instrument. That is what one I know of. There
No, what normally we are practicing, sir. Everybody has got a Omron or some other equipment and using the BP, measuring the BP. So what we had normally practice, cause them to bring their BP and measure with our normal BP and clinic and calibrate that. Would that be acceptable?
Sir, ideally not, but that is a poor man's validated instrument.
Okay.
So ideally we should make
practical, it is being done every day. Then we go that way.
Hello.
We go for the. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah.
डॉक्टर सिंह
हेलो
डॉक्टर सिंह
सर, मैं बहुत देर से वेट कर रहा हूँ और मेरे को क्वेश्चन दिया जा रहा है।
पूछिए
क्या बताया सर? ये
पूछिए
क्वेश्चन नहीं पूछने दिया जाता।
अरे आप प्लीज आंसर
पूछिए।
सर, मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि डॉक्टर साहब ने कहा है कि पूरे वर्ल्ड में 25% लोग हाइपरटेंसिव हैं। ये बात सही है? हेलो।
हाँ जी सर, ये बात जो मैंने आपको स्लाइड दिखाई थी वो
पूरे वर्ल्ड में 25% लोग हाइपरटेंसिव हैं।
हाँ जी है सर, बिल्कुल करेक्ट है सर।
तो मेरा क्वेश्चन है कि आप लोग इस बारे में क्या कर रहे हैं? ये लोग क्यों है हाइपरटेंसिव? उनको हाइपरटेंसिव कैसे नहीं होना चाहिए? क्या करोगे आप लोग? इसके बारे में बताइए मेरे को। क्यों है ये हाइपरटेंसिव?
सर, हाइपरटेंशन होने का रीजन क्या है?
कोई भी आपने एक शब्द नहीं बोला है। आपने क्या है 25% लोग हैं।
डॉक्टर सिंह
क्यों है ये?
डॉक्टर सिंह
इनको बताओ भैया, ये करो तो हाइपरटेंशन दूर हो जाओगे।
डॉक्टर सिंह उन्होंने बताया तो नॉन फार्माकोलॉजिकल ट्रीटमेंट और क्या बताएंगे?
अरे इससे क्या मतलब होता है? दक्षिण में
सर, मैं इसका आंसर करता हूँ सर का मैं आंसर करता हूँ सर। हाँ, तो पहले सुन तो लीजिए।
थोड़ा धीरे बोलिए ना डॉक्टर सिंह। हाँ
देखिए सर, ऐसा है कि आप इस समय एक कमरे में बैठे हैं जहाँ पे लाइट चल रही है, ठीक है। आप गाड़ी से एक जगह से दूसरी जगह जाते हैं, तो जब हम मॉडर्न कन्वीनियंस इसको करनी पड़ती है, नुकसान भी होना पड़ता है। मैं आपको गारंटी से कहता हूँ, ये जो 25% लोग हाइपरटेंसिव हैं, इनको जंगलों में दे दीजिए, इनका सेलफोन छीन लीजिए, इनके कपड़े उतार दीजिए और ये 15 दिन में नॉर्मोटेंसिव बन जाएंगे। ठीक है। और एक स्टडी निकोबार आइलैंड में देखा था कि 36 साल का वहाँ की एवरेज लाइफ 36 साल से 40 साल है। तो वहाँ पे देखा गया कि 36 साल की उम्र पे भी BP 90 या 100 क्रॉस नहीं करता। तो ये BP जो हमने बढ़ाया है ना, हमने खुद अपनी बेवकूफ़ी से बढ़ाया है। अब हम अपनी बेवकूफ़ी हटाएंगे नहीं। अब कोविड आ गया, किसी ने कोविड बिहेवियर चेंज किया अपना। तो सही साहब, क्या होता है कि इंसान को प्रॉब्लम का सोल्यूशन पता होता है, लेकिन वो सोल्यूशन जानना नहीं चाहता।
वेरी करेक्ट। तो
Sir, one question. Can I ask?
हाँ जी।
Sir, if someone
Yeah, go ahead.
if someone BP remains 130/90 constantly, is it necessary to take any medication?
No.
And second, is there any risk of kidney damage in long term?
Yeah. So it is a very, very valid question because borderline blood pressure, what should we do? The BP is 130/90. Number one, ma'am, I'll like you to check the BP in a proper way. What happens is a lot of times we check the BP when we are under some stress or we are not rested properly. So
every time it comes 130/90 in 24 hours and patient is not in stress.
or this 130/90 is spread over 2 months or 1 day?
He always, his BP always remains 130/90. And
As I mentioned in my guideline, if the BP is 130/90, we should follow healthy lifestyle. We should do regular exercise. We should control the salt in our diet. But medicines are not recommended.
in spite of these measures, it comes 130/90.
Let me complete my answer. You asked the question, you are not letting me complete my answer. So, if the BP is remaining 130/90, no medicine is required throughout life. So, because the threshold of treatment is BP more than either 140 or more than 90. If the BP is less than that or equal to that, no medicine is required. BP, it will not be more because that's why it are not recommended. So no on long-term basis the BP is recommended.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Dr. John, you want to ask? Dr. John?
Yeah. I want to ask and not in the way the condition wants to know. अरे भाई कर लो अपने आप को, मुझे भी सवाल पूछने दो। अपने आप को म्यूट कर लो, मुझे भी सवाल पूछने दो। डॉक्टर बीके मेहता म्यूट करिए। डॉक्टर बीके मेहता।
हाँ जी।
मेहता सर, डॉक्टर मेहता।
अच्छा, म्यूट करता हूँ सर।
डॉक्टर रिपिन। हाँ सर। डॉक्टर रिपिन, wonderful session, and you almost touched everything. And there are some basic questions that I want to ask you, sir.
Yeah, definitely.
So you said that we should always look for a secondary cause of hypertension, which at times may be treatable or maybe even curable. My question is linked to resistant hypertension. Sir, what we know that nearly 10% of all hypertensives are secondary hypertensive. But what percentage of resistant hypertensive
Hello? Dr. Chauhan, I missed your question.
Sir, you said that 10% of overall hypertensive have resistant hypertension. Secondary hypertension. And you also said that resistant hypertension seriously for causes of secondary hypertension.
Yeah.
So what percentage of overall resistant hypertensive have secondary hypertension?
Yeah, this is a very important question.
In your judgment.
Yeah, you have to remember is that resistant hypertension is much more common than secondary hypertension. So we'll see a lot of patients coming to our clinic. We have given them 2-3 medicines and the BP is still not coming okay. So that number will be much higher, and secondary hypertension, as we know in various trials and studies, is not more than 7 to 10%. I'll see that more than 85% hypertensive patients. Because there was one study done which showed that if we take 100 patients and we can control their blood pressure with one medicine in around 50% of the patients, we may require 2 medicines in another 20% of the patients. That is 70% of the patients we can take care with 1 or 2 medicines. But patients requiring 3 or more medicines will be something like 20 to 30% of our total population. So I think 1/3 of our hypertensive patients will be resistant hypertension. And out of those 1/3, some will be secondary hypertension, maybe 1/3 of those patients will be secondary hypertension because that is 10% of the total pool of the patients who are having high blood pressure.
Dr. John, please ask. Hello. Shankar.
डॉक्टर चौहान आप पूछ रहे हैं?
हाँ मेरा actually I lost the connection in between. I don't know why. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sir, we can
Dr.
hear you.
Vipin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Okay. So you mentioned about the preferential treatment. And the agents that we need to use in, I remember from the times in 86 when beta blockers were on an ascendancy, and we always used to say that first diuretic, then beta blocker, then tension channel blocker, and then the other agent. What is the algorithm today? Because JNC8 confused us totally, and nobody quotes JNC8 anymore. So I would like to ask you, what is your algorithm?
So what I usually follow is that I'll always prefer a ARB plus a CCB. That is, let's say, for simplistic sake, that telmisartan plus amlodipine combination is one of my favorite combinations to be used as a dual antihypertensive agent when I am giving them. In patients with mild hypertension, when the BP is, let's say, between 140 to 150 and 90 to 95, I can then give either of the two, either telmisartan alone or amlodipine alone as a preferred combination. So this is my starting point, and once the BP is not controlled, I may increase the dose of these agents. And as Dr. Mangala has rightly pointed out, that in elderly, I am very skeptical of giving diuretics in Indian patients because I have ended up with hyponatremia again and again. So if I am forced to give a diuretic in an elderly patient, I'll be doing frequent sodium potassium checks in those patients. So telmisartan plus a CCB, which can be amlodipine, and few of the patients who complain of swelling in the feet, we can give cilnidipine also.
Sir, there has been a recent some. So
Hello.
Benefit albuminuria. Cilnidipine is supposed to be benefiting albuminuria more than amlodipine, especially in diabetic. Your comment on that?
Yeah, sir, you see, again, there is a dichotomy of opinion. When I talk to America, so they say that okay, there is no head-to-head comparison where it has been clearly proven that in a large trial amlodipine is inferior to cilnidipine. So they all prefer amlodipine as the first agent. But when I say that the patients have a lot of edema feet issues, so they have few suggestions. They say that if you have to give amlodipine, always give it in night, not in the morning. If you combine amlodipine with the ARB, then the edema feet is slightly less. So they still prefer amlodipine over cilnidipine. Having said that, but having said that, I think the only
go ahead.
The only advantage I see of cilnidipine is less edema feet. So other advantages are theoretical. They have never been proven in a large head-to-head trial.
What I want to know is, I want to know that there is a new CCB called the azilidipine, which has come in last about 1 year. Your experience with that?
So azilidipine, again, advantage, I think all the CCBs, their main advantage over a calcium or amlodipine is that they cause less edema feet. And a lot of times patient is very upset. Let's say female patient, if she has swelling in the feet and her feet are not looking nice, so she will be very unhappy. So I think we can use all these agents when we have swelling in the feet. Azithromycin can be used, Nidipine can be used, but the core molecule still remains amlodipine. With all the big trials, mega trials,
And also, sir, and also, sir, there has been some suggestion that azithromycin causes benefits vis-a-vis the heart rate. It causes bradycardia as compared to amlodipine.
So what happens is that these are all benefits which are theoretical, which are shown in small studies. There is no head-to-head comparison between the large trials. So a lot of these benefits are what the medical representatives are pushing us to use more of this molecule. But if you go to any scientific fora and you talk of the various molecules, I have tried the same question you asked me. I tried in once I was in Paris meeting, and then there was a American Society of Hypertension president came to India, and he was in Hyderabad, and I asked him the same question. So both the times I got the same answer, amlodipine. So they said, okay, other CCBs are there, but the evidence, large big trials where mortality benefit has been seen is only with amlodipine, not with other. So we go with evidence, we don't go with this thing. So they say that you want to take the benefits of amlodipine because it is azithromycin is a CCB and cilnidipine is a CCB, and then you want to say that okay, they are better. So we don't, that doesn't wash with us in if we take everything. So they are very clear that preferring amlodipine over the other CCBs. We should be using the other CCBs if we want to have some benefit, but then we are not clear about the mortality benefit which comes with use of amlodipine for hypertension treatment. So they were very clear in this statement. I was arguing the same way you were arguing in front of them, and they were on the other side. I was on the other side and they were on my side. But they all of them always told me the same answer whenever I asked the same question in any scientific fora where European speakers were there or American speakers were there. They were very clear that we are preferring amlodipine over other CCBs. Having said that, more than half my patients are on cilnidipine or some are on azithromycin also as of now. But this is what is the scientific answer. And practically that we have to use these agents for our patients' convenience.
Sir, one last question. Sir, if you allow me my if you allow me my last question, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Please go ahead. Dr. Vipin, a very important part and parcel of the arsenal against hypertension. My humble submission is that there has never been a mortality benefit demonstrated with diuretics. So to use the agent consistently in first, second, or third line as a choice, what is your take on using diuretics while we do not have any evidence on mortality benefit?
No. I think there is some. You see, there is no evidence of hydrochlorothiazide as a mortality benefit for hypertension. But if you take ALERT trial, diuretics were in the forefront. So ALERT trial is the largest trial on hypertension, and their diuretics were proven to be very good. In fact, they were not expecting at the time because diuretics was the cheapest molecule, and the pharma companies were expecting some expensive molecules to come in the forefront. But ALERT trial clearly showed. But the stress was that all the trials which have shown mortality benefit in hypertension is on thiazide or thiazide-like diuretics, not with hydrochlorothiazide. So no trial on hydrochlorothiazide has shown mortality benefit, but chlorothiazide trials on indapamide have shown clearly benefits in hypertension treatment. So if you are adding a diuretic, we are scientifically on a sound ground in giving those molecules as our in those patients. Unfortunately, India being a tropical country, a lot of time we end up with electrolyte disturbance in India when you give a diuretic. So I think we have to be very, very careful in giving a diuretic. At least we have to recheck the sodium potassium levels, and sometimes our patients, once we start them on medicine, will not come to us on regular follow-up. So that is one point of worry which remains in my mind, that I put a patient on a diuretic, he doesn't come for 6 months, and in between he has hyponatremia. He'll blame me for that. And he will not blame that he has not come to my clinic after 6 weeks as recommended with the test I have recommended, but if he lands up in trouble, they say, okay, आपकी दवाई से problem होगी. So that is one of the reasons I'm skeptical of giving diuretics as my first line drug. But not because they don't have benefit, but hydrochlorothiazide not to be used. Very, very clear in. So I think why the companies are still bringing that combination, I'm not sure. But chlorothiazide plus or indapamide are very good.
Good.
Dr. Ripin,
Please.
yeah, you rightly said that Dipin sublingual should not be given. I have seen many anesthetists giving in OT sublingual whenever BP is high, because I have listened to lecture like this earlier also. I have told them not to give, but if they are in front of me, they are giving sublingually Dipin. So you must take this lecture in front of the anesthetist also. In one conference of anesthetists also, they should also learn. I have at least 3-4 anesthetists I have encountered, and they didn't listen. They are giving Dipin sublingually.
Dr. Pradhan, not only anesthetists, all the
Yes.
doctors in the OPD, in emergency hospitals, this is being done, as a routine. So it has to be taught to those people to stop it.
So today, at least we can take a lesson from Dr. Ripin. It should never be given. Dr. Ripin, is it all right? Or you will allow in certain conditions sublingual
Never to
Dipin?
give. Never to give.
Never?
Never to give.
And
Dr. Poddar, Dr. Ashish here. How many of you surgeons would prefer the case to be cancelled on table when the BP is high?
that is not the question. That is not the question. This is not against any anesthetist. This is,
No. I'm just saying that it is because we have to go through with the procedure.
That is right. That is right. No, I agree, Dr. Ashish. Surgeon will always want कि केस तो आज ही हो जाए. लेकिन still if there is a risk of coronary event, Dr. Ripin said there is a risk of certain coronary event.
Absolutely.
I agree. Ashish, surgeons are also at fault. They also pressurize their surgeon. Anesthetic. So can labetalol IV can be given, Dr. Ripin, in such cases?
Labetalol IV can be given, sir, in this situation, but I think if we are going with anesthesia, sometimes a mild sedation will bring the BP down. So a lot of times this patient is apprehensive. That is
No, patient is already under GA. Still BP is high.
Then the BP is high, we can always give IV labetalol, or better is to start an IV nitroglycerin infusion. We can always stop, or and the effect will go off in minutes. So I think that is even faster acting than labetalol.
That is all big hospitals do that. They give drip of nitroglycerin. That is done by all big hospitals.
That is very safe, sir. Very safe. Because we stop it, the effect goes off in a minute or so. So we are very
Yes, I agree. That's right.
But there they have the arterial monitoring also being done. The nitroglycerin should be given only when there is an arterial line being there in the patient. We are talking about small patients where hernia or something is being done, where we don't put these lines on.
Yeah, Dr. Ashish, this is done in all big hospital sites.
Exactly.
Yes.
Let us come to the end.
Acha, Dr. Gupta, just one comment. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Dr. Ripin, how often do you advise polysomnography in your cases who are in patients requiring 3-4 drugs? That is number one.
Yeah.
Number two is that if a patient has a borderline creatinine high and BP control is a problem, then what is your prescription?
So number one, both are very relevant questions. If the patient is obese, having a short neck, history of excessive snoring, BP is not controlled, OSA is very important. We should always look for that. And once we get that CPAP in, I think we can reduce 1 or 2 pills out of the total number of tablets he is taking. So that is a very, very valid point, and I should have included that in my discussion that OSA should be always looked in resistant hypertension patients. Secondly, second question is also very relevant. If the creatinine is high, what to do? So number one is that I will not prefer a diuretic in body creatinine because it can act like a double-edged sword. So amlodipine or any CCB like cilnidipine, benadipine, azilidipine can be given in these patients. We can give ARBs in this patient if the patient is coming for regular follow-ups, because if the creatinine goes on increasing, then we obviously will not be able to continue with the ARBs. But if the creatinine remains stable, then ARBs can be tried in this subgroup of patients. If we have tried these two molecules and still BP remains high, then I think we have to go to alpha blockers or centrally acting agents like clonine for bring the BP down.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir, Dr. Vipin.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
You have been so kind to answer all the questions, and there are so many other questions which are in my mind as well as in the other doctor's mind. So we should have a discussion again on the same topic.
Yes, sir.
And we be very thankful. We are very thankful to you for having this, and thankful to all the people for coming and listening to the lecture today, although there were disturbances in between. Thanks a lot. Dr.